This photo shows Siwei and Manjon posing with their gold medals from their first ever World Championship win in 2018. And from that moment, this pair went on to truly dominate their discipline, winning 3 more world titles, 2 Asian Games titles, 3 All England titles, many World Tour titles, and then capping it all off with the Olympic gold in Paris in 2024. And the guy in the middle? Well, that's Cristian Luque Manjon, and he was the man behind all of the success, instrumental in getting them in the best possible shape, improving their physical skills, and overcoming career-ending injuries. Together, these 3 truly dominated the world of badminton, and in a video early this year, I spoke with Cristian to tell that story. Now, in 2025, Zheng, Siwei and Cristian are teaming up once more, but this time it's about trying to change the future of Chinese badminton and possibly even world badminton. Later this year, we'll see the unveiling of the ZSwing International Badminton Academy. This was something Cristian mentioned to me in our last interview, and so I just knew I'd have to speak to him again to get more details. And that's exactly what I did, and what I am bringing you in this video. Now, I'll be honest, this video did start out as a simple Q&A, and I thought maybe we'd talk about his academy within that. But as we spoke, and as I began editing this video, I knew where the focus should lie. In this interview, we talk about his academy and the future as Cristian sees it for badminton. But we also talk about the current Chinese setup, what makes Chinese players so good, what Europe can do to bridge that gap, and also what are things that children and young badminton players should do when beginning their road to the pro levels. Honestly, it's an incredibly interesting conversation, and one I hope you enjoy. So actually, before we get into any of the subscriber questions, I've got one of my own questions, and I'm going to ask it because I think there's a little bit of overlap with some of the stuff some of my subscribers have asked. I'm also very curious, and I think it links also with what you're going to be doing with Zheng, Siwei in China with your academy. On the recent Average Not Average podcast with Victor Axon and CK, CK asked Victor for advice he'd give to amateurs or young players in terms of the gym. I think Victor started by saying that too many kids go to the gym too soon, but I believe as he spoke, it became apparent he meant going too heavy too soon, without learning proper technique and all of that. Now, obviously, to me, that sounds like quite an obvious statement to make, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on how kids or young players should approach the gym and their training in there.
First of all, there is like a misunderstanding about the strength training. The people think that the strength training is just moving heavy weights, but when you think about young kids, now we are gonna, the first thing is strength training is very safe and also recommended, even when they are very young. When they are ready to practice regularly sport, they actually ready to start with the strength training. One of the most important things is you need someone who guide these kids to do the proper training that, as Victor said, the technique is the most important thing in the first steps. In this case, for the kids, we will focus in basic movements: pull, push, hinge, squats, lunges. And then when we train these kind of kids, the adaptations that we create is not structural. It's not going to change the size of the muscle. It's neural. When we do strength training, we call neuromuscular system. When we create these kind of adaptations in the kids, helps for the better activation of the muscle, the better coordination intra and intermuscular activation. And these kind of adaptations will help us for the future. It has been proven that the kids that they start, we call neuromuscular training, talks about the strength, it's strength, plyometrics, agility, proprioception, all the different qualities. The kids that they start very young to do this kind of training, they have better adaptations in the future.
So that makes sense. It's a little bit like what they always say, if someone like a young child can learn a skill when they're young, it's more likely they're going to be able to maintain it, and it's going to help them in adult life. You know, like with badminton, a lot of people talk about, if you want to be really good, you have to have started as a child at least learning the basics, because it's much harder to learn those things as an adult or even as a teenager. So I'm assuming...
And there are some kind of adaptations that are much better to do it, create it when you are young. And after, if you didn't develop this or the fundamental movement skills when you are young, it's more difficult to create these kind of adaptations when you are older.
What kind of movements, or what are some examples of that's better to do it as a child?
Recommendations, the scientific recommendation is the kids, they need to learn first before the specific skills of a sport. They need to develop the fundamental movements like running, jumping, landing, rotating, all this throwing, all these kind of basic skills that will help in the future to develop the specific skills of the sport.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I mean, I can remember hearing a lot of stories even when I was a kid, they talk about Australian sports and how they were so good at, say, cricket and all that stuff, because they, from a young age or at schools, it was taught how to throw, taught how to run, taught how to...
It's very funny because they are usually the media focus about the athletes that were very good since they were young, and the people thinks this is the normal pattern, but actually this is not the real pattern. Book called Range, and compare like Tiger Woods, since he was 3 years old, he was the best, and Roger Federer. Roger Federer, he didn't start like a specialized in tennis until he was 12, 13. Both of them, they were very successful in their sport, but the normal pattern is more the Roger Federer pattern than the Tiger Woods. And many pro athletes, they played many different sports when they were young, and they didn't specialize in the sport until they were 12, 13 or older.
Yeah. So would you say, I mean, obviously your field is more in the strength conditioning, but in terms of badminton, even if some kids are 13, 14 and they probably played a bit of badminton, but they're not taking it too seriously, that's not too late to start, if they've obviously had an upbringing of learning the basics of movement and all the, the running, all that kind of stuff.
Of course not. Actually, in these ages when there is more kids drop the sports, and I think is the moment where they start to specialize and training more. And usually in the younger ages, the difference in the kids is the kids that they develop physically faster and that they have an advantage. But they are, we call the late developers, that maybe these ones can pass in the future to the other ones that develop faster. And this is some of the aspects that we are developing in the academy, into try to analyze the different kids and analyze if the results are because they are better badminton players or because their physical qualities make them be better in this period.
How are you going to go about that in relation to the young kids at the academy you and Zheng Siwei are going to be starting?
The project we have is thinking long term. We are not focusing the results in the short term. We are thinking to prepare these players to become a good players in the future, but not only the players that will become professionals, but also other players or other paths. Because now, for example, there are players that can get a scholarship through university if they have enough level of badminton. It's like create the environment where everybody can develop in their own rhythm. They will arrive, some of them, they will arrive to professional, and other ones, they will just have fun practicing the sport. Another one will help them to go to the university through all the different paths.
In regards to children and training in the gym, so how old, you said, I think you said something along the lines of, was it when they're able to play fully within their sport? Was that correct? What age roughly is that? So that's what, 12, 13?
Or younger.
Younger.
There are recommendations, scientific recommendations that when they're 7, 8 years old, they can start to do strength training. But you don't need to go to the gym to do strength training. You can do strength training through games, for example, in these ages.
How would you go about doing strength training in...
For example, you can do, if you think about a squat movement, you can tell a kid to throw a balloon up and then go down and then go up to take the balloon, and then you are creating this kind of paths, but in a fun environment.
You're treating it very much like I can only really relate to badminton because I've coached kids from a young age, and that's kind of stuff you would do with a balloon with them, tapping up, like fun games so they can learn the basics, but they're doing it they don't feel like they're just being taught things. They're actually learning it, but they're doing it in an entertaining way. So.
Exactly. And then another session you can focus more. Okay, we are going to talk about the technique, which aspects you need to focus. And then they start to understand the basic concepts. And then when you want to increase the load, and then they will have the basics covered.
Yeah. I also think people should be quite surprised. I've noticed this with not every single child, but a lot of kids, they do understand a lot more than you think when it comes to technique. And if they're taught from a young age, taught basically, they can remember that stuff and regurgitate it to you, for years to come. So I think the younger, so obviously they don't need to necessarily in the gym. How often would you recommend someone to do sort of what you call strength training? I'm guessing if it's something like squatting with a balloon, you could do that very frequently. Strength training will be one of the main aspects. This doesn't mean that we are going to do exclusive strength training during the session, but incorporate with plyometrics, strength, speed, coordination. With the youngest ones we will integrate everything through games, and then after because I don't know if you are familiar with the concept of peak high velocity. Is when the kids have the growth, the fastest growth. Okay. When and then you can calculate which kids are under this, which kids are in the middle, and which kids are after this period. According to that, you adapt the training that they need to do. If you have kids that they are after this period, then you can start to structure more this kind of strength training, because you can create more structural adaptations, because these kids, they already mature to do this kind of training. That actually leads on quite nicely to actually a question from one of the subscribers, the first one, because it was about training with kids. Obviously, his question was, when working with kid athletes, what is your recommendation on how to plan their training? Obviously, what you just said in relation to if they're in these different stages, they'd have to do different things. It must be quite difficult to plan for an entire group of kids, etc. What would your recommendations be on how to plan their training?
For me, I actually, it's funny because there is some people who asked me this before because they have problems because we always call about individualization of the training, but when you work with a large group of people, it's very difficult. And then for me, the best thing is to group the people according to their characteristics. Usually you will have a similar group of players with similar characteristics, and then you can arrange the training for this group of kids. And then another group that, for example, they are older, 13, 14, they can start to do another kind of training. But this will be independent of the badminton level, will be more according to the biological. And then for me, they will be dividing the kids in different groups according to their characteristics and according to the training they need to do.
So just, you have to kind of individualize it within the group. You kind of like grouping them together to become
exactly. If you don't have the resources to do like very individual training, and it's the best.
It's difficult. So I guess an answer to that would be like, you got to kind of figure out where they are. Is there an easy way to figure out if you don't have, the know-how or anything to know where?
There is a lot of literature that explains the way they just measure them, the how tall they are, and after you check the size when they sit, and then there are some formulas can calculate the peak high velocity, and you can know in which phase they are, and according to that you arrange the training for this.
This might be an obvious question, but just the flip side, what's something that kids, for young athletes or coaches might be watching this that do coach youngsters, what's one, maybe two things they should avoid doing? As in, what things do you see too many people doing that you're like, no, they shouldn't really be doing that for?
For example, the endurance training focus in too much running, long runnings in very young kids is not the ideal, because you cannot create the adaptations that you are trying to find. It's better to create games, speed games, or change of direction games, more create adaptation, more neural adaptation than central adaptations you want through the running. all this kind of training for me should be avoided in these ages, because you are not going to create the adaptations that you are thinking you will.
So running is something more for when they're a bit older.
Exactly, older, yeah.
Okay, I did. Well, I wouldn't say I was that young when I started training seriously myself, but I remember doing a lot of running sessions and those kind of endurance ones. So maybe I definitely had it wrong in that respect. That's interesting. Is there anything else? So endurance training, I assume one would be going too heavy too soon. That's no good for anyone.
Yeah,
really.
and
is there anything else that
like we say, the first thing is the technique before increasing the load. To like basics, how to land, how to jump, how to do change of direction, running, all these kind of tools that we give to the kids, because when we after increase the load or specificity of the training, if we cover all these, we can progress much faster and better.
What are some myths and misconceptions about badminton training?
The same we talk about the running, long running. It's important for badminton, and there are many national teams or professional teams that they still do like running, early morning running laps around the track and field. And then we have to think that badminton is more sport. Of course, the aerobic capacity is important, but badminton is a sport where you need to repeat high intensity efforts during long period of time, and you need to repeat the high intensity effort, then have a break, and then repeat again, and this again for whole match. Then this kind of low intensity running will not help you to achieve these adaptations for your performance. Then there is still many people who do long runnings and thinking that this is going to improve their performance when they compete or play badminton. For me, my recommendation is think more about how the badminton is, and then do it more high intensity training with short intervals and different rest periods according with the adaptations you want to create, but focus more in this kind of training than long running.
So would you, in terms of running on the track, I mean, I've done some of those sessions where you start off by doing how many laps you can do, and then it gets shorter. What about, like, say, like when some of those sessions at the end, you're doing 50 meters or 100 meter sprints. Is that better than doing just a run?
I will not recommend 50 or 100 meters sprints for one thing, because I remember Siwei had 2 hamstring injuries. The 2 times was doing this kind of training. The thing is, he is a very powerful athlete, and because he's a badminton player, they never train him as a sprinter. Is the proper technique of the sprint. And then when he runs for long distance, he runs very fast, but he has very low trunk control, and this can affect to pull the hamstring. Actually, it was in a short period, because the team started to do some sprint training, like 50, 100 meters sprints. And then in 1 month, he pulled the hamstring of both legs doing this kind of training.
Yeah, well, sprints aren't that. If you ever do sprints, the next day your hamstrings are sore if you've never done it before. So
and I remember it was like 8 sets of 100 meters, and it was in the last one he pulled the muscle. Then for me, since in badminton the distance you cover is very short, then you don't need like long sprints. It's more important the acceleration, because you need to arrive from one point to another point in the shortest time possible, but you never achieve high speed in the badminton court because it's very small. Instead of focusing the speed training with long distance, I will focus more in acceleration. It doesn't mean that you don't need to do speed training. It's also very important, but in different way.
So how would you build up endurance badminton? Is it lots of small things that just, because obviously you need to get exhausted?
Yeah, but for me, the best way how we did the last period was integrate this in badminton, because the first thing is you create less fatigue, because you need less amount of training, and you need to think always the adaptations that you create, but also the fatigue that you create doing this. Then if you can create the maximum of the adaptations with the minimum of fatigue, is the best way.
Yeah.
This is the first thing, but there are some kind of adaptations, that central adaptations, that maybe you need higher intensities that you can achieve on core doing the technical tactical training. And then for me, I always prefer low impact activities instead of running, because they already do a lot of jumping, change of direction, and impact. And to protect this, we have like, the Versa climber.
Yeah.
This one, I really like it because you can achieve very high intensities and you work all the body. I prefer this than bike, for example. You have the option. I will recommend this kind of training outside instead of running, like low impact.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've seen a lot of countries these days do biking, and within the Nash Centre at England, we did more bike sessions than running. I think for that reason, there was a few players that their knees started to go, so obviously cycling started to kind of come in, and I think a lot of people felt it was more cycling built your leg power more. There was some sort of theory with that it would be more for badminton, but the Versa climber. But would you say that a lot of people can just build their endurance by playing on court? Like the physical stuff comes from
imagine you play 5 hours on court, how you cannot develop your aerobic capacity.
Yeah, and trust me, if you can do it well, I've done sessions where you work for 20 seconds, you get 10 seconds rest, and you do that 10 times, you can be on the floor dead. And that's like, well, how long is that? 5 minutes. Yeah. And you do that a few times. You can't do too many of them. So
if you adjust the load and progress the load on core, and it's not the intensity, the time you rest between the sets, how many sets, and you increase this with a period of time, you can develop your endurance on core.
What are some training methods / techniques that were thought to be very useful but aren't actually? Is there any other than running that you can think of?
I think another one I have seen a lot is like the jump rope, but not just because jump rope is the amount of jump rope. Because I remember like seeing sets of 1,500 jumps after the practice, for example.
Yeah. That sounds ridiculous.
It's like which kind of adaptations you want to create, because these players, they already played like 4 or 5 hours, and then you add this to the training. There is no any adaptation. You are going to create more fatigue and increase the risk of injury.
I guess from what you're saying, sorry, it just seems like if you've already done a good session, you don't need to add. There seems to be, I think, a misconception in badminton is that more is better. That the more you do,
this is another,
the better you're stronger you'll get. And actually, I watch not necessarily a lot of sports, but I do follow a lot of fitness channels and other things. And most people that know what they're talking about seem to say the less you can do is usually better, because you can recover from that, and it's more
train hard. No, it's train smart. This is the key. But I think the main problem is not understanding the physical qualities that you are working when you are doing a badminton exercise. Because if you do an exercise where you already did like 100 smash and jumps, you think, okay, maybe the goal at the end of the session is not doing more jumps. It's the opposite. It's protect the body after you did 100 jumps. It's very important to understand that a badminton drill incorporate like psychological, technical, tactical, physical aspects, and you need to understand what is happening on court.
I think, I mean, I was definitely guilty of that as a player myself. And when I first started coaching, like, you'd be like, right, we're going to do this session. It's going to get, and over the weeks, it's going to get more and more. And it almost gets a little bit silly rather than it being focused. And sometimes I think a lot of people forget that there's a lot of pressure and on the body just playing badminton as a sport. Yeah. So, like you're jumping, like you say, jumping around, landing on one leg and stuff. And then if you were to follow that up by doing more jumping on that leg, and then you do all sorts of other things. Before we move on, one other thing, I can't remember if I saw this from you, but I think I've seen it before. Another one is, what are your thoughts on speed drills with the ladders and stuff to get more speed in your feet, or fast feet drills and all that kind of stuff? Are they as effective as they're made out to be? Because that's something else that a lot of players do.
The wrong concept is things that this helps you improve your agility, because agility depends on many different factors. Depends of the strength, speed, depends of change of direction, and depends of making decision process. For consider an exercise of agility, it has to be a making decision process in this exercise. There is many people that say this is agility training, but this is not agility. This is just footwork training, in place footwork training. Then depends of the goal you have. If you want to improve like foot contact in a very close drill can help you in some point if you need to improve some specific. Or I use as a part of the warm-up or preparation before some high intensity training involves like change of direction of jumping. I use these kind of drills, but never in my case to improve agility or speed of this kind of training, because it's a very close drill, very far from the reality of the sport. If we talk about kids, for example, will be a different point of view, because my goal will be improve the basic coordination in the kids, and then incorporate these kind of exercises. Developing the general coordination will be a good decision in this case.
So using ladders and stuff better for younger, or those fast feet drills for younger?
Yeah, if you think ladders to improve badminton performance, I will say no. If you think to develop general aspects of some basic plyometric or some basic coordination with the kids, and then I will say yes.
Yeah. I mean, the way I'd see it in terms of not necessarily ladder drills, because most time you do ladder drills, your feet are too close together in relation to badminton. Usually your feet are fast, and for fast feet, it should be more like developing a quick split step, like would be like the first part of your movement to a shot, like getting your feet from out underneath you.
Yeah, quickly. Like a split step. Yeah,
a very quick split step would be more than going quickly up a ladder. Because I did a lot of that stuff, and I never really felt it worked for me. I couldn't figure out why, but it's clearly just.
But it's like everything. I did many things myself also when I started to work, that now if I think back, I will say, oh, what I was doing. But and then you start to read and ask you questions, and then you start to change things. But this is a normal process.
Yeah. So again, I kind of like surmise it in terms of getting faster or more endurance. A lot of it seems to be it's got to be very specific to the sport, which in this case is badminton. I asked this for running, so I'll ask it for skipping. Is skipping got any sort of benefit, or is it something you think really should?
Yeah, in terms of plyometric training, it can be a very good tool. Is the fast contact with the ground, and then you can integrate like coordination drills where you one leg, two legs, make it more difficult. But I will say you cannot do it a long amount of foot contacts in the ground if you really want to improve the high forces or high speed forces, generate the maximum of force in short contacts. That is how badminton is. It's like the problem of training a badminton player as a weightlifter. Weightlifter has a lot of time to generate strength, and badminton player has to generate power or strength in very short time. And then you need to develop these qualities. And also it's not only in the vertical way, it's horizontal also. Then you need to think this also when you develop the strength exercises for your athlete.
What's your opinion on the future of direction of badminton in terms of the physical side? Where do you think people are going to take it?
I think in terms of physical qualities, it's not only badminton, all the sports are in evolution. The intensities, the speed. I remember watching the match, Ansi Jung with Wang Qi. There was the final. I don't know if you watched, but it was amazing.
It was a really grueling match.
Every single point was very high intensity and quality. And I think this is I remember I was watching an interview of professional football player from now. He was talking about the best football players of the past. And he say, if now my team plays against them, we win 6-0 very easy with the best players of 10 years ago. And I think it's the same, because the intensity of the game is much higher, and the players are physically different than before. Of course, if you see Li Chongwei, maybe it was an exception, but in general,
I think there are some. I think Lindan and Li Chongwei, even though technically, I know they only stopped, say, what is it, probably 6-7 years ago, both of them. But their height was 10-15 years ago. It's difficult to see that they're not as physically as good. I'd say they would be just as good. But if you go back any further than that, you could probably say that the players now are on a physical
and also
side.
They play. I remember I was seeing the number of tournaments they play now and 10 years before, and it's almost double in some.
It actually is. I mean, if you even go back to early 2000s, I think, and you compare it with, say, Young, who does play a lot more. Like,
Yeah.
she plays like 80 to 90 matches in a year.
Yeah.
And I can remember looking back and seeing players that went, we're talking the top players, even ones that almost went undefeated, playing 30 or 40 matches in a year. Far less, 6 to 8 tournaments, whereas now it's, I think most players play a minimum of 14.
Yeah, and I remember doing the Olympics classification. It was even more the difference.
Yeah. In an Olympic qualification year, it would be for most. Although I actually think most of the top players don't need to play as many because I know they're fighting for the top seeds, but they're going to probably qualify. I think they could. But
I think
some of the players that are on the borderline, they're playing 20, 25 match tournaments almost every week. They're playing something. So
yeah, and I think that in terms of a sports science of controlling the training load and recovery on these kind of aspects will be very important in the future of a sport. Now I think the national teams need to try to incorporate more professional for other, because I think mainly in the past was the head coach and then maybe some physical coach, but there are now many more aspects you need to control to try to maintain the level for a long time.
So you think in terms of like the future direction, it's not necessarily going to be, they might get a little faster, a little stronger, but they're going to be more be able to maintain that for longer and keep getting better even. So you think we might going to see more players in their 30s still?
Yeah, if they start to change this, of course, I think will be.
Yeah, no, it's quite interesting to know. I mean, the future direction of badminton in all sorts of terms. I mean, that's something, again, that was mentioned by Victor. He was talking about he said like the speed, the power, everything is going to be, if you look in 10, 15 years, that you might look back and say his games are really slow or not that. A bit like you can do that throughout the history.
Yeah, I agree, because this is happening in all the sports. And then if you see in tennis, Djokovic is 37 and he's still playing, or LeBron, like we talked. These players still can play at very high level, and this is because they started to incorporate the sports science, and they spend a lot of resources in recovery and maintaining the level.
Yeah, and especially
all the aspects about training.
Tennis obviously a bit similar to badminton in terms of being a racket sport. But I know in basketball they play a lot. I mean, their seasons are absolutely crazy. So, and it's
the difference. I think the main difference in tennis and badminton is that there is not really off season. And then in case the NBA, they have like 4 months of season. Yeah. And I think badminton sometimes is very difficult, but because there is not really off season, because the top players, they finish the World Tour finals and then they start January. And there is just a few weeks between one season and the other season. Actually, the off season usually is before All England, because when it's the biggest period.
Yeah.
But there is not really a long period to, we are going to focus on recovery, on...
it's actually around this time, even around the All England, I'd say is what you'd call it, because you had a bit of a period. There were some tournaments that players did play, but not the high tournaments. So there was a good 6 weeks for the All England, and then although there's been the Continental Championships, there's quite a long period before the Sudirman Cup between them. Like there's this period seems to be, almost like the period where you could deem it an off
exactly,
season.
because
I'm not sure I could really
at the end of the year they are playing many tournaments.
Definitely it seems to be from like July and through till January. It's pretty full on. If you could give a public service announcement, one message to all badminton players about how to train play, what would it be? I think linking towards with more of a focus on the health and longevity.
I will say start to invest now in your future. It's not when you are starting to getting old, then it's going to be late. And then start to invest now. Start to do the proper recovery. If you have an injury, the proper recovery of this injury, not to start to play until you fully recover. Even sometimes it's difficult because you need to play tournament. But you see, I think Victor, he has been doing all the time this. When he has a big problem, he stopped for a while and not to start to play until he's fully recovered. And then this allows him to be in the perfect condition when he plays.
Yeah, and he's done it a few times. He did it with his
ankles. Yeah,
he's done it with his back surgery. I mean, that's not
nothing major. And I probably, if he didn't do this, probably he will not be the chance to keep playing, because the body will not respond to play.
Although I must find it's quite funny talking about doing that when we spoke last about Zheng Siwei refusing to stop when he had that pretty bad knee injury. But obviously he had you there to work around it and kind of manage it, but not everyone has that.
But this was not the best decision. We were lucky that was good.
Yeah. So it would be investing now in your health when you're a little bit younger.
Yeah, all the
don't wait
aspects,
till things happen.
Yeah, we call the invisible training, like the sleep. The sleep is the most important for recovery, and the nutrition, sleep, the load management. Like in this case, LeBron talks when he finished the season, he spent like a few weeks disconnect from basketball, and then he's tried to increase the load and recovery from the problems he had during the season. Then it's like thinking in a long term, not just in a short term.
I think that's quite important. I know I can speak from experience that wasn't something I was good at, but as I've got older, not that I'm a professional player anymore, but I still train and stuff, is knowing when to just take the time off and knowing that actually, I think sometimes you feel like if you take a day or in 2 days, you're going to lose everything that you've done. But actually,
you see the change you face.
Yeah, exactly. There's been quite a few examples of players recently that have taken time off and now come back rejuvenated. Obviously, body's probably recovered and they're feeling good and they're coming back to the top level. So, and I think that can transfer down to the lower levels as well. It's all relevant.
Yeah, the same.
Relation. Yeah. No, that would be mine if anyone ever asked me. I was like, don't worry, you're not going to lose everything in a few weeks, and even if you do, you can get it back. Quite quickly. Is that true? I mean, if you say don't train.
Yeah, if someone that has been practicing a sport all their life, actually you need less time to achieve against the same level. It's not going to be someone that never did the sport, and then it's going to be. It's the concept of muscle memory, but actually it's true. It's there are athletes that needs very short time until they get again to the top level.
Yeah, I think you said Zheng Siwei was one of those that could.
Yeah, it was very for him.
Level.
Yeah.
I know you said Wang Yachong took a bit longer, but I can imagine it wasn't that long to.
No, neither. But you could see the process was slower than him.
What is the training schedule of the Chinese players that you know of currently? Like, how many hours do they train a day, and how's it broken down in terms of match play skills, training on the gym, etc.?
There is a basic schedule, like usually 6 days a week, 4 days morning, afternoon, and 2 days half day. Usually morning off, and this morning off, most of the players they do running early morning.
So even on their day off, they're still doing something.
Usually it's before the breakfast, like 6:30 in the morning, I think. And they go for running and then breakfast, and then they rest the morning, and the training start like after lunch, like 1:30 or 2 o'clock.
Do they see that running as like an active recovery kind of thing? Like just
I don't know, actually, it's true. I never ask why. I think it's more like, I don't know how to explain. It's more the philosophy of the culture, is part of the culture, and respect the tradition, something like that. Not thinking about performance, or it's like something you need to do.
So in terms of they do 2 sessions a day, is it usually hitting is one of them, and then weights?
But I can talk about me, because what we did is very in the specific of the week training. It's every week was different, according to the moment of the season, if you have tournament the week after or no, and then it changed a lot. And then in some periods, we could have double physical training session, and some periods just 30 minutes of warm up in one day. And this was very specific week by week. But in general, all the players, they do physical training every day, but not just strength. And then one day maybe they do speed training, and then running, and strength training. Usually we did like 2 main strength training sessions during the week.
Okay. And the others were more like physical, like the running or the whatever physical they were doing.
More conditioning, and depends of this was very specific for the week.
So I think I remember when we spoke last, you actually said correct me if I'm actually misremembering, but the top Chinese players don't train as much as people might think they do. Their training volume, is it actually as high? I mean, how many hours a day do most of them do, would you say?
For example, in mixed doubles, how we divide it is the main players, they have their own sparrings, and then they were arranging the training according to what they needed. Because usually they divide the training by exercise of 20, 30, 40 minutes duration of the exercises. I think less than 2 hours session. And maybe some at the end, they would some specific technical skills on court.
No, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, it's not as much. I think my perception, I think, always was that China trained. Again, I think a lot of Asian people think of Asian players in general training for really long hours, like 3-4 hours, and they do twice a day, and it's just absolutely crazy. Yeah. No, that's I think that's where I'm remembering is. I think you said that there's a lot less.
And another thing another advantage that they have is because they have many of the top players of the world training together every day.
Yeah.
And then this is an advantage more for the young generation. Imagine, for example, you see the two mixed doubles, they started to train with us in 2020, and then they are out to the international in 2000, and they have been playing during 3-4 years with the best two mixed doubles of the world every day.
Yeah, it brings up an interesting question, because sometimes, I mean, it's not always the case, but say Chinese players get out of juniors, and sometimes we don't see them for a year or two. You might see them a bit, they'll play China tournaments. Yeah. Whereas a lot of other Asian countries, and this was even the case when I played, Japan did this a lot. They would send their juniors straight into some of the European tournaments, the slightly lower levels, to get more experience. You'd start seeing them, and then you'd see them maybe in the higher in the world a lot earlier, whereas the Chinese players take longer. Is there any particular reason?
I think the reason is because they have very good players in the top. If they have the number one and number two, until these players, they cannot
they need
overpass
to
this.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. They almost got like a B in it. I think I saw a photo of it was China's B or C squad, and there was 30 or 40 players in it. I mean, the squads they've got are quite pretty.
Yeah, like mixed double, we were like 16 players, I think.
Yeah, no, exactly, and they're probably all had the capability of being top like 5, 10 in the world, easy. Yeah. So it's probably more of a case of just the competition to be in a position to get
exactly.
Is pretty high, and I guess it's not like they're not being trained. Those juniors will be in the squad training with they'll get opportunities to train, so they're still improve. Okay, that kind of is what I thought would be the case. Just some other countries, they send those players out a little bit more to get more experience, so you see them a little bit sooner, whereas Chinese players tend to take a little longer. There are some exceptions. I think Zheng Siwei was an exception. He got he was right at the top almost immediately.
Another important aspect that why the Chinese don't start to compete late is because I feel that it's always a big difference between junior and professional, but not only in badminton, in all the sports. And I think if you do this jump very fast and you are not mentally prepared maybe you are the best one in the world and then you start to professional and you lose every single match. You need to prepare also for this. And I think also it's a very important transition. And also prepare the body for the highest intensity of training. It's not the same playing at junior level than professional level. You need long time to be ready to play and compete in these conditions.
What I'm trying to think of a follow-up question, Zach. That's quite interesting. I know about going from juniors to seniors. You see it so often that players that will even win the world juniors, when they hit the seniors, especially if they hit the top level seniors, suddenly they're losing a lot of first rounds for a few years. But so that's the psychological thing. But you talked about the physicalness, because obviously the difference to junior senior level is a massive jump. What sort of things can you see they need to physically get better at from when they're say 18, 19 to early 20s? Is there anything that you think like a common theme that players physically need to get better at in that period?
I think it's like first be adapted to play at higher intensities for longer time. I think just play some tournaments in the high level can help them to understand like the different of demands, and then of course training with pro players every day to try to because there is another problem that this happened in China, that many of the junior players, they had injuries when they started to play in the national teams because they were following the same training that the pro they have been doing for years, and then the body was not adapted to do this kind of training. I think this is also very important to consider, to make a transition step between the junior and the pro athlete in terms of competitions, in terms of training load, in terms to adjust them for the changes in training and coaches and everything.
No, that actually what you said is more kind of the question I should have asked, is that kind of slow transition into, because a lot of them, if they come out of, say, they're 18, 19, or they come out of juniors and suddenly they're the seniors, now you must do what?
Yeah.
That guy, and he's been training with the senior team for 6 years. It seems, when you say it out loud, it sounds silly to suggest that players, but a lot of players will end up in that situation.
Because I think never, no one thought about this process, about how the changes are in different terms and how to prepare these athletes for the pro level.
How would you go about? Would it be like they would would they have their own specific training for that block?
I think I will maybe introduce progressively, like start their own training, not making many changes, and incorporate them progressively. It's like someone who become from an injury, you will do the same process. You will start to do some exercises with the pro level, and then another part following your development, and then integrate more until you become.
I guess the overall load would have to be a little bit less. And slowly build it up to where they can.
It's like in all the sports, when you play, if you play, imagine a junior player playing with Siwei, the intensity will be much higher, and not only intensity but also in terms of psychological training with them, not wanting to make mistakes because it's going to affect his training, and all these kind of aspects I think are very important.
But I think sometimes it might get overlooked, because there are some players that can jump from junior, and they're physically already like a man at 18, or they're already physically very good, and they can jump in, or a very little period they need to kind of adapt. And so
actually this will be very individual to the athlete.
And I think because of that, you do get those outliers that everyone thinks, well, then everyone should follow. And so it's like, again, it's having that little bit more of a individual approach to how these players need to. That's really interesting, actually, how, because when you were at the Chinese team, were there a number of players that I think I can off the top of my head, a few might have been from injury, that were in that boat, and that's what caused them to, they were never able to progress because they just couldn't, the jump was too big initially? Were there any players that you can think of, not necessarily in the mix, maybe into the Chinese team, that came out of juniors and then they were thrown straight into
you remember the mixed double junior champion Feng? He has another partner. They became world champions, junior mixed doubles, and the girl.
Oh yeah, Feng Yanze,
the girl who was the champion.
Yeah, I can't remember the names.
Yeah, she never could. Like, she stayed in the team for a while, but she never could achieve this level. She never progressed because she didn't adapt to the higher level training. Yeah.
But do you think she possibly?
Yes, she could do it in a long term, in a longer term.
They don't want the. They
cannot. They don't have the need to do that.
Yeah,
because they can put another one.
Yeah, and that's probably why, in general, in the past, we've been seeing that European players do better later, is because they're allowed to actually play on that long. They're not thrown out of the system, or even if they are, they can still compete. But that's.
And also that there are some Asian countries that they starting to have some independent players that also will help for this.
What do you think makes the Chinese players so good? We did actually touch on this a little bit when we spoke last, but I'm not sure it made it into the video, but it's still an interesting question. So what do you think makes the Chinese players so good? What part of their training stands out to you? And what should Europe, I guess, for example, is there anything that Europe can can copy or take from that to obviously.
If we talk about the one thing is how these players arrive to be that good. This is one thing, is how the system is created that they have these levels. And then, of course, China badminton is the sport number one in China, and you have millions of players that you can select. You have very specialized training since they are very young. From there, you can select in every stage which one are the best ones until they arrive to the pro team. You have from a wide amount of players, you can select the best one. Of course, you have an advantage there because you don't need to worry about the other ones that don't arrive because you have a lot. And then if there is one that you lose in the way to arrive there, you can take another one that will be more or less at the same level.
If in regards to that, is that, you know, like whenever I'm not sure if this is everyone in Europe, but I definitely think this way, that obviously Asian training and Chinese especially is very tough. I think that was one thing we spoke about before, is like being able to change that. You know, we talk about all the hard sessions and stuff. There's another question a bit later that I'll get to in terms of the Chinese don't have a scientific approach, yet they still obviously create champions. Is it because they have so many that if players don't make it through the harsh training, the only ones that are left are just absolutely incredible?
I truly believe that the players that they are in the first team, they are super athletes because they survived to many years of training, of high intensity training, and they arrived there. Then if you arrive there, you are a super athlete. I think in many aspects it's more experience based than scientific based. Then they are efficient. They won great Olympic champions, and they do it through this way.
In terms of obviously just to bring it back a little bit to you and your academy, obviously you're looking to kind of semi-change that. It's gonna be difficult because it's had so much success, and you can kind of a lot of people are going to go, whoa.
Yeah.
Like you just said, the ones that come through are the super athletes. So why would you want to change the beginning that creates those? You could change when they become super athletes. We can then keep them from getting further injured, and we develop them. So how?
Yeah, the first thing is education of the people. We have a team of people in the academy who believes in this way of training, and this is very important. And the second thing is you have to think that maybe they lost many of the athletes in the way that could be better than the other ones. And this is the ones we are going to try to save.
Yeah, I would agree, actually, in terms of just thinking about it quickly, is some of the ones that might not have made it through actually might have been better badminton players.
Exactly.
So actually you can keep more of the more talented players and still have them as that makes sense, rather than the ones that make it through are just physically very good. Exactly. Obviously they're good at badminton, but there might be some that were lost.
Because if you are not if you are a late develop and you develop physically, you need to find another ways to win the matches, and maybe this help you to be a better badminton player. And in the future, when you start to grow and you have to try start to make changes in your body, you can focus in another abilities, but you already develop the badminton abilities that will help you to become a good badminton player.
Sports science usage from past to present. I'm assuming with the Chinese team, you were the first one to really. were they using anything before you turned up? Like any sort of what you could deem as sports science behind their training, or was it all just on experience of the people that came before?
Was 95% experience. Yeah, but actually it's very funny because you see that now many players start to use their heart rate in their arm, the polar bracelet, you see. And then this was when I was there, and I started to use it. And then one day I asked, okay, how you use the data you get from the matches? And they say, no, we don't check the data. Then why?
So they just
maybe they check the data, but they don't make the analysis about the data. They say, okay, this match was 180 and the minimum was 120, but that's all. There is no deeper analysis of how to use this data for changing training.
That sounds like me wearing a Garmin watch for a run. My heart rate went to this, so that's it. I'm not using it any further. I think we spoke last time, like China, if they were able to incorporate this more, just how unstoppable, the level they could bring their players to. And that's, I guess, what you and Zheng Siwei are trying to kind of gradually change. So do you get, for the young athletes, are you going to get them to wear any of these? Do you see a lot of benefit in people wearing those Like
I
walk
don't think when
bands
they are
or...
very young, not. But I think for me, the most important is to understand the difference of the demands of the exercises they do on court and the difference of the demands of the competition. This is how we use it. And then you can say, okay, in this period that we want to increase the load, these kind of exercises give us higher load, high intensities, more change of direction, more jumps. And then in this period that we want to adjust the training, we use these kind of exercises because the parameters that we are developing are the ones who we want to develop in this period. For example, some of the exercises that they used to play is play a match with no leaf. And then we know that this reduces a lot the intensity because of the no leaf. And then when we were using these kind of exercises when we were doing like low intensity session and more focus in recovery, for example.
Okay, so you could use the data from that match knowing that it was, okay, that makes it the game a lot easier. So the practice around that can also be used as a lower intensity.
Yeah, and we measure that it was we could see very clearly when they play with a high level, with the top 3 teams, the intensity was much higher. And then if we want to prepare for this, we need to train in these intensities.
Yeah. Did you use that for stuff like 3v1, 4v1, pretty much everything, wasn't it?
Yeah, we checked for 6 months. We have every single exercise they did.
In terms of the exercises, I know that you did that. Did you also do it for who was on the other side of the net? Say Zheng, Siwei, Manjon. So if they had these 3 players on the other side, it was crazy. But obviously,
but I remember there were some players that they were doing smashes. Like if they play defense 3 against 2, on the other side they needed to smash during every single shot.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so pretty much everything, even down to who was feeding the practice. Is there anything you think, going back to the question, that Europe can take from the way that the Chinese train?
I think the copy is not the solution.
Yeah.
Because the system is completely different. You cannot copy the same system because the context is very, very different. They have a much more resources for everything since they start very young, and they have much more players where they don't need to worry about all the ones that they lose in the way to arrive to the top. And in Europe, you need to care about every single player because you don't have many players who practice badminton. If you are gonna try to be technically better than them, it's impossible because when they are young, they repeat the same single shots thousands of times. You need to be better in the aspects like they are not good now in the recovery and the sports science and all these kind of aspects that can make the difference. But you cannot copy what they are doing because it's not going to work outside of China.
I mean, that's been the thought within European countries for a while. That I remember having Kenneth Jonassen, who's now coaching in Malaysia, but the Danish coach, when he coached briefly in England, I was there. And one of the first things he said was, we're not going to play like the Asian players. We need to be more, we need to think of ways that can feed into what we're good at to compete with them. We need to think of different ways. And that was just more from a badminton perspective, like what you do tactically, etc. Obviously that can run into like what you're saying. Maybe we can be even better at how scientific or specific we are.
How recovery after the match, how the warm up before the match, how I prepare better for this. But in terms of technical aspects, skills, it's going to be very difficult to.
Yeah. No, it will be very, very difficult. I mean, you can make up a little bit, but like you say, if they're doing repetition after repetition.
Yeah,
you try
when
and get
they are
kids...
young, this is the base of their training, and then when they arrive to the top level, they already have this ability.
So I'm assuming in the academy, Siwei, you won't change that aspect. The repetitive technical aspects are going to
Actually, yes. The idea is we will. It's like not changing everything, but it's adapting a little bit because we know that if you learn more like through the environment, creating situations where the things that you want to happen has better learning adaptations for the kids, just to repeating without the context. And then, of course, you will need repetition of some basic techniques, but how it's gonna improve the badminton quality is gonna be through situations that they can develop these kind of skills, and they need to find solutions by themselves.
Okay, so one last question, and I think again it brings it back around a little bit to the start, the academy that you're starting with Zheng Siwei. Again, it's a long question. I think it's best if I just read it. So, looking back on your journey with Zheng Siwei and Wang Yaochong, what single insight or innovation from your collaboration do you believe could most transform the future of badminton training globally? And how do you hope your upcoming academy will inspire a new generation to balance tradition, science, and individual autonomy to redefine the excellence in the sport? It's a very well-worded question, I must admit. That's very well put together. There's a few things there, but obviously I'll let you kind of break it down.
I think it's like I think one of the important aspects about badminton is to change more from the traditional point of view or the traditional methodology that people has been following for years, more integrating the sports science inside the training, like all the sports did. If we talk about football 20 years ago, maybe it's like badminton is right now. And we can see how this changed in the last 20 years. And I think badminton is a little bit behind in this. And I think following the path of sports like tennis or basketball or football will make the difference in many aspects. And we can see players playing at the high level for more years. And then we can see, I don't know, the more professional training of the athletes during the training, during the competitions, taking care of their body in different ways that they do now. It's more holistic approach than just focus on what they do on court.
So I guess as well, that would also help with obviously the amount of tournaments, we spoke about this earlier, is increasing.
Yeah.
So if that sort of approach to training, players should still be able to handle that much, maybe a slight reduction. I think players do play a little bit too much, but not playing a crazy amount, because most players still are able to go and do some other external tournaments that we saw a few of them last year, and they're still able to do it and willing to do it. So I don't think it is quite a busy schedule, but I think with this kind of approach that you're talking about, players should be able to still handle it.
It's about load management. You need to plan very well the season and in which moment you're trying to reduce the training and adjust the training and all this kind. I think it's more in terms of the invisible training, what we don't see, what they do outside of the court.
How I see, I mean, your academy, it's going to be a while before you see the results from it, because you're only just starting, and you're starting with your kids. So 10, 15 years before we even see them potentially becoming, on the world's thing. But a big way for me, I see of badminton changing, like you talked about football changing, is that the best teams in the world need to change. And at the moment, the best teams in the world are predominantly Asia. And Asia is where it seems to be less of a sports science approach. So I think by your academy trying to kind of maybe change some of that within China, the biggest team in the world, that might flow out to the other countries. And once every nation's doing it more, then I can see that changing.
Actually, I think we have a big responsibility what we are doing. Because if we want to be like an example of the things, we need to do it in the proper way. We cannot say we are going to do this and after not do it or not really applying the sports science in our training. And then this is something we talk a lot. First, we starting with a team where I'm going to be like the head of a sports science, and then going to be a physical coach, and then psychologist, nutritionist, and rehabilitation coach, and plus the coaches. We're going to try to integrate everything together.
Is the plan to have more than one academy, to have it spread around China? Because
this is something also we discussed. The first thing is we need to establish our system, because it's something very new. If we grow very fast before we establish and everybody knows how the system works, it's going to be a problem. But this is the idea, and also to have international players coming there or national teams training there, since it's an international academy. But first of all, we want to establish, and even if it's possible in the future, move outside of China.
Also, I guess, again, I know these are all long-term things, but if we're talking about changing China's approach in general, obviously one thing, like I said, having more than one academy, because China's massive, it's not going to make much of an overall change to China if it's only in one place. But are you going to be trying to have talks with the national team as well, like a relationship with the top team to kind of?
Actually, it's very funny because one of the things we wanted to do since the beginning is like have pro players in our academy, and there are already some national teams or pro players contact to have the chance. I was discussing this with Siwei, and he told me, okay, first of all, I need to talk with the national team to see what they think about that, because we are gonna be training like the opponents.
Yeah.
And then a few weeks ago, he had a meeting with Manjon to explaining all the project, and then he said, yeah, it's okay, you are free to do whatever you want, we don't have any problem. And because we also say we offer you collaboration if you need our help in any case, maybe bring the team to train to our base also could be an option in the future.
Yeah.
But yeah, we are open to collaborate with them.
Yeah, I think that would be important, because if you're doing all the good stuff with the kids, but then when they get sent to the national team, it reverts back. They'll undo. I'm not saying that they're, obviously we know that they're good at being able to produce champions, but it'd be such a different approach that it could almost undo a lot of the work that you would have done. So having that kind of bit of influence, I guess, or collaboration with the national team would be, well, I would see it as very
important. And also in terms of education, also we are trying to create some course to try to educate the coaches who work with grassroots and this kind of level to explain a little bit another approach.
Sounds like you're going to be very, very busy, Cristian.
Looking like, yeah.
I mean, just listing off the number of roles that you're doing is already a lot. So I guess you're going to obviously over time employ, if it grows, more people in to kind of, everything will grow as a team. To start with, it's hard, but your team will grow and hopefully it will expand and influence Chinese badminton. It'll be very interesting. I mean, it's a long way away, but hopefully, in 10, 15 years.
For me, it's very interesting how it's going to be the response of the people. Because also the people we are hiring, they need to understand that they are coming to a place where we are going to do the things a little bit different and to understand that philosophy, and they need to start to change things that they have been doing.
And changing some of those thoughts that have been ingrained for so long.
Exactly. The most important thing is Siwei. It's very clear with this direction. And then this, of course, the process is going to be easier like that.
Yeah. Having Siwei obviously is a huge, having him on board. That he's a big voice in the badminton world and has obviously a lot of sway. No, that's really, really interesting. Like I said, it's going to be very exciting to see how this progresses over the next, however long, but definitely the first 5 to 10 years. It's going to be good. Because by then maybe we'll see some of these players either on the international circuit or playing in the junior.
I think the first step will be try to contact the province, because we are in the Zhejiang, is the province where Siwei, Yachon, they belong, and then try to because it's going to be the first step where these players are going, and then to try to make the connection with this level province team to see the collaboration.
I mean, I know I spoke about you having to talk with the national team, but there's all the levels in between that you'll have to also kind of create relationships.
But we have now the head coach of junior team, or one of the coaches is, I don't know if you remember him, as Huang Yuchan.
I do remember that name does ring a bell. He was
actually, I was training him for a while because he belongs to Zhejiang team. 2019 Momota lost only 2 matches, 1 lost against him.
I do remember.
He's also one of the coaches in the junior team now, and then we have also a good relation with him. And now since this is changing to the generation, Siwei was in the team, and some players becoming coaches, and then this transition maybe will be easier.
I think it'd be easier as obviously Siwei gets a little older, and the players that come coaches are the ones that are his juniors. It'll be a little bit easier to influence them than the ones older and with no, definitely. It's going to be a lot of bureaucracy you'll have to deal with, and a lot of talks and lots of different people around, but it is exciting. I definitely will be keeping a close eye, and I'll keep in touch with you. Definitely, I want to keep getting updates as it goes along.
You have the chance to visit China, you can go.
I was getting to that. I'd love to come down. I'd love to Not to train, I just want to observe and watch and just see how it's all done. That would be absolutely amazing. Yeah, no, that would be brilliant. So anyway, Cristian, that is the last question that I had written down. We've been speaking for 2 hours now, I think.
Okay.
Around 2 hours. It's gone very quickly. So I think we should, I think we can call it a day on the questions. I think most of them were answered throughout. There's lots of follow-up questions we did, and I think we covered a lot of different things there. So lots of really cool, interesting stuff for people to watch. Obviously, maybe in the future, I know you're going to be very busy with, you're flying to China soon, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm going on 24, and then I'm going to be until the 10th of June in China.
Yeah, so obviously very difficult to keep in touch with, then you'll be far too busy anyway, but maybe in the future, once you've kind of got settled, I'd love to...
Yeah, after I go back there to see how is everything and how we establish, we can go more deep about.
Yeah, no, that would be absolutely amazing. I'm sure people would love to know what's going on there, if you're able to talk about it, that is. So
this
perfect.
Not the problem.
So yeah, as always, thank you ever so much for taking the time to speak to me. Very insightful, very interesting. I'm sure people are going to get a lot out of this conversation. Lots of things that we spoke about. Is there anything that you just want to add at the end, or that maybe you'd like to add on any of the questions that were asked, or as we've covered quite a lot?
I don't know. We have been talking for a long time, and now
I can't quite
I don't remember where
about.
we have been talking.
I'm sure we can follow up anything online or outside of this interview. I think if there's anything that comes in, but yeah, no. So yeah, no, I'm really excited to see how this academy is, and from the photos and everything you've posted, it looks really, really good, and obviously everything you said.
Yeah, we will share more at when we have everything built, and
yeah. No, I'm super excited to see, and I wish you nothing but the best of luck with that. So
thank you.
Thanks again. I'll say bye now. Well, I'll just stop the recording.
Okay.